Our final speaker during this first part of the workshop is Tim Urbaniak. Tim is an expert on rock art recording, and he's been pretty much of a groundbreaker in terms of adapting new technologies to rock art site recording. Take it away, Tim.
So, okay. Hey, good morning, everybody. Wow, a lot of really familiar names and faces here. And thank you for the privilege of being allowed to associate with this group. Okay, so a couple of things first, how I came into this technology aspect. I first became interested in archaeology as a child, like probably a lot of us did. As a youngster growing up in Lower Michigan, the family farm, when it had rained, my dad would go out into the fields and look for arrowheads, and I would go with him. And Dad was a high school science teacher, so he became interested in some paleontology as well. I got used to going out to the field and looking for things, which many of us began with. I came into computer technology in the mid-'80s, actually through industrial structural design, which was where I was working at the time. I spent a little over a decade doing industrial structural steel, and have worked on buildings all over the world. Actually, we were fabricating concrete batch plants in Billings, Montana, which is where I'm located, in the 80s when the Shah fell in Iran, and that stopped fabrication in the shop for a bit. I became interested in rock art in about the mid-'80s because working as a drafter, my body size had increased dramatically from being a skinny guy to being bigger, and I needed to get out and get some walking done. So there are lots of public land in this area, and as you go out and walk on public land, well, there are things to see. And so I became interested in that. I went into teaching in the late 1980s and taught in drafting and design at MSU Billings. And over time, I began at a 2-year VOTEC, then it became a 2-year technical college, and then it became a 2-year, what they call a city college. And so I've worked at 3 different academic institutions, but kept the same desk over those three transitions. In drafting and design, as technologies came along, again, I became associated with computer technology in the mainframe era. And as the PC came in, we brought it into the office. When I went into teaching, of course, working in an academic institution, there's pressure to do research and engage some field. I had drawn many drafting things commercially, and so I became interested in synthesis across disciplines. That all of these disciplines we were using in construction could be applied to archaeology and could be applied to the study of rock art, which was far more interesting. Okay, so at about the time these technologies came out, I was a very early adapter. 3D modeling, digital imaging, multimedia, global positioning, GIS, LiDAR, laser scanning, photogrammetry, both small and large scale, RTI, 3D printing, virtual environments. So I'm familiar with these and more. So for over 20 years, I led student historical and archaeological projects, and eventually worked my way through a doctorate at the University of Montana, where my dissertation, and you can find this online, my dissertation is Historic Inscriptions of the Northern Plains. Now, I went that direction for 2 reasons. One reason I went that way is if a person that is just getting into this kind of research is competing for grant dollars with some of the names that are in this conference and beyond, it could be very, very difficult. Well, I discovered that really no one was paying any attention to the historic inscriptions. And on some aspects of conservation, I very well might part paths with some of the conservators, because I see all of this as a continuation of human communication. You know, anthropologically speaking, this is all communication, where regardless of the cultural importance of rock art, it's a form of communication. It's communication that was left on the landscape, really with no further intent to define what it was. And this is generally the case with historic inscriptions as well. And on the Northern Plains, many of these sites you see from pre-contact into contemporary. And I would say, as an editorial note, it's been my experience that one of the greatest deterrents to site vandalism today is to have cell phone access. Again, communication with humans has changed dramatically over the last 20 years. And one way, I say this kind of jokingly, but kind of serious. There used to be people that studied graffiti in bathrooms. That is now a dead field. There just isn't enough of it to really study, because when people are in bathrooms now, they're using their cell phones to communicate. They're not writing on the walls of the stall. Some of it still happens, absolutely, but not nearly as much as used to. That is not to say that I don't support. Again, I'm in Montana, so you know, someone goes out and spray paints a site today, I believe that should be a hanging offense. I'm fine with that. But again, I think that there's a lot more to anthropological communication going on between the pictographs, the petroglyphs, and the inscriptions that have been left now for well, a couple hundred years now in the Northern Plains. There's more going on there than is literally on the surface. So at any rate, I retired about 5 years ago after 29 years of teaching. I did a cancer thing for a year, took a year off and got a new bladder, and became a consultant. And so I continue to apply a multitude of technologies through contract and volunteer projects, and to support, you know, again, these plans, these management plans. It's becoming far more common for technology to be included as part of a technology plan or as part of a management plan, and that can bring perils and pitfalls. I've also become involved in writing historic National Register nominations, which I enjoy a great deal. Let me hop down now. So for today, for our breakouts, I've got some case study PowerPoints put together. I know there are a couple of you here that are quite familiar with some of these sites and some of these projects. You're probably familiar with some of these technologies. You know, D-stretch is very commonly used in our field now, and photogrammetry and reflective transformation imaging, the RTI, they can work together. And so, you know, again, since a lot of people end up learning one of these technologies or maybe two, in some of these brief little PowerPoints I've put together, show you how multiple technologies can be used together. Again, these non-contact technologies do no harm to figures or sites. Again, as I say there, they do no physical harm to sites, but there are certainly technological perils and pitfalls. You know, first of all, are there ethical issues present? When you bring people together from different disciplines to work on projects, not everyone will be aware of the same concerns as, you know, within varying groups. And so that's something that I have to continue to be aware of myself. I will admit that I've referred to myself before as being, you know, digital colonialist. I tend to embrace the technology before I step back and look at how I'm using it or how it can be used. I mean, I don't always do that, but I'm aware that I perhaps have in the past, and am very aware of that now. Another consideration for these technologies, you know, is the technology understood by your client, your supervisor, whomever you're applying this for? This can be a very major factor, especially due to the topic of data migration, bringing your material forward into the future and making it so that it can still be done. You know, it is an issue. With digital technology, archiving can also be an issue. You know, is the archiving available? You know, again, with the previous, is it in a format that someone can still take off the shelf and use? In a lot of government organizations, it will be, if you're archiving cultural data, it's a factor as to who controls the data. And a pitfall is, you know, what happens if and when the data becomes uncontrollable? We're seeing a lot of this right now, where, you know, places like Facebook that have these rock art forums, people are posting photos of rock art. They're posting photos. A lot of the cameras that are being used now, when they post the photos, the metadata contains the GPS location. So if people are sharing photo files, then I don't believe Facebook carries that data. But when they share photo files with someone, it's possible with a lot of the cameras to extract the GPS location. Three-dimensional models, we're seeing people creating 3D models and posting them on the web as well, both within 3D printing contexts and in just, you know, viewing spatial contexts. That could be a factor. Again, this is something that once these models are placed, again, in the wild, it's very difficult to ever get control about them again. So again, consider that there would be a petroglyph site. The tribe finds it extremely, you know, this is extremely special site to them. They don't really want people even visiting the site. And then it shows up in a Facebook forum and someone's saying where it is. You know, what happens then? What happens then? And that is something that we really do not have an answer for right now. Also, it's possible with a cell phone that if there's I've got a picture in the lower right of this that was actually being done, that was done years ago as a historic inscription. You can see the face there. But today, with a cell phone, you could take about a dozen photos of that from different angles, send it to a website, and by the time you get home from vacation, you could have a coffee cup with that on the side of it. You know, so certainly with the technology, it becomes more and more difficult to contain this data and to control the data.